Have you ever thought about who the most powerful dark wizard in the Harry Potter universe really is? What if Voldemort isn't the ultimate villain we've all believed him to be? In today's video, you'll find out why Gellert Grindelwald might actually be the greatest dark wizard of all time, and why Voldemort pales in comparison. For years, I was convinced that Voldemort was the most terrifying, unstoppable, and dangerous wizard in the wizarding world. He seemed invincible, striking fear into the hearts of everyone. His presence alone sent shivers down spines. I even declared him the greatest dark wizard in one of my previous articles. But then, something changed. A comment made me question everything. Someone suggested that Grindelwald, not Voldemort, deserved that title. At first, I dismissed it. But the more I read about Grindelwald, the more I compared his history to Voldemort's, the more I began to doubt my original stance. And now I've come to a shocking realization. Grindelwald wasn't just as powerful as Voldemort. He was stronger, smarter, far more dangerous, and I'm about to prove it. Before we dive in, just a quick disclaimer. This is my personal opinion. If you disagree, feel free to debate in the comments. Now let's get started. Voldemort was fueled by hatred toward his father, his mother, his teachers, muggles, muggle-borns, and basically anyone who wasn't bowing to him. His fear of death defined his entire existence. That fear led him to create Horcruxes, desperately trying to cheat fate. His followers weren't loyal out of admiration. They served him out of terror. Even his closest allies, like the Malfoys and Peter Pettigrew, feared him more than they respected him. At his core, Voldemort was a frightened, bitter child lashing out at the world. Grindelwald, he was different. He had vision. He wasn't just seeking power, he wanted to reshape the world. He believed in his own superiority and sought the Deathly Hallows to cement his dominance. Unlike Voldemort, he didn't force followers into submission. People followed him because they were captivated by his charisma, his ideals. He even managed to sway young Dumbledore, something Voldemort could never dream of. And unlike Voldemort, Grindelwald had regrets. In the end, he faced his own failures, acknowledged his crimes. That alone makes him a far more complex and compelling figure. Now let's talk about their impact. Voldemort started 2 wars. His reign of terror was brutal, but it was limited. He never dared to expand beyond Britain. Despite all his power, he remained a local villain. Grindelwald. He ignited a war that spread across Europe and even reached America. He wasn't just a threat to the UK, he was a global nightmare. His followers weren't just terrorizing wizards in one country. They were shaking the foundations of the entire wizarding world. His goal, the creation of a magical empire, a vision far grander than Voldemort's personal vendettas. He even built his own prison, Nurmengard, a fortress meant to hold his enemies. Ironic, considering it became his own final resting place. Now let's compare their magical abilities. Voldemort was undeniably skilled. He excelled in the dark arts from a young age, mastered Horcruxes, and even learned to fly without a broom. He was a formidable duelist, taking on some of the best wizards of his time. His battle with Dumbledore at the Ministry was intense, though it's worth noting that Dumbledore was already weakened at that point. Grindelwald, however, was a true prodigy. From his youth, he displayed extraordinary magical talent, quickly becoming one of Durmstrang's top students. His combat skills were unmatched. He defeated Aberforth Dumbledore, overpowered American auras, and mastered wandless magic. He fought entire squads of wizards and won. And let's not forget his duel with Dumbledore. Many call it the greatest wizarding battle in history. Unlike Voldemort's fight with a weakened Dumbledore, Grindelwald faced Albus at his peak, and he nearly won. That alone speaks volumes. So who truly stands above Voldemort was feared. Grindelwald was revered. Voldemort ruled through fear. Grindelwald ruled through ideology. Voldemort's ambitions were personal. Grindelwald sought to change the world. In the end, there's no contest. Grindelwald wasn't just a dark wizard, he was a force of nature, a villain whose shadow loomed far beyond Voldemort's reach. Voldemort's biggest weakness was his inability to inspire true loyalty. He demanded obedience, ruled through threats and violence, and saw his followers as expendable. The Death Eaters weren't his allies, they were tools. The moment one failed him, they were discarded. Look at Lucius Malfoy. A devoted servant for years, yet when he failed to bring Voldemort the prophecy, he was humiliated, stripped of status, and thrown aside. Even Bellatrix, his most fanatical supporter, never truly knew him. He kept secrets even from those closest to him. No one was safe from his wrath. That paranoia made him weak. A leader who can't trust anyone is a leader who will always be alone. Grindelwald was the opposite. His followers didn't serve him out of fear, they believed in him. He convinced brilliant wizards and witches to join his cause willingly. People weren't afraid to speak with him, to argue, to discuss ideas. He built an army of dedicated supporters, people who saw him as a visionary, not a tyrant. This difference was crucial. Voldemort's army crumbled the moment he showed weakness. The second Harry revealed that he was mortal, the Death Eaters fled, but Grindelwald's supporters stood by him for decades. Even after his capture, they didn't betray him. That's the power of true leadership. And then there's the question of intelligence. Voldemort was smart, no doubt about that. He was cunning, manipulative, and knew how to play the long game. But his arrogance often blinded him. He underestimated his enemies, dismissed the importance of love and friendship, and believed himself untouchable. His downfall was written the moment he marked Harry as his equal. He created the very prophecy that led to his defeat. He thought he was outsmarting fate, but in reality, he was walking straight into his own destruction. Grindelwald, on the other hand, played his cards carefully. He didn't just rely on brute force. He was a strategist. He built his influence over time, spreading his ideology across continents, carefully positioning himself until he was unstoppable. He didn't rush into battle. He calculated his moves. He knew when to fight and when to wait. Even in his final duel with Dumbledore, it wasn't recklessness that led to his defeat. It was the bond they once shared. Unlike Voldemort, who lost because of his own foolish mistakes, Grindelwald lost because Dumbledore was the only wizard he couldn't bring himself to kill. Another key difference was their approach to power. Voldemort wanted dominance for the sake of control. He didn't have a vision beyond ruling over others. His empire was built on destruction, fear, and submission. He didn't care about improving the world, only about ensuring that it bowed to him. There was no ideology, no philosophy, just an insatiable hunger for power. Grindelwald had a vision. He wanted to create a new world order. His dream was to unite the wizarding world under one rule, to place magical beings above muggles, to remove secrecy and take control. His methods were ruthless, but his goal was clear. He saw himself as a savior, not just a ruler. That made him far more dangerous. A villain who believes he is doing the right thing is always more terrifying than one who simply craves power. And then there's their legacies. Voldemort's reign ended in ruins. The moment he fell, his empire crumbled. His name became a curse, not a symbol of power, but of fear and shame. No one carried on his vision. No one tried to rebuild his movement. The Death Eaters vanished into hiding, and the wizarding world moved on. Grindelwald's ideas never died. Even after his defeat, his influence remained. His ideology lived on in secret, whispered among those who still believed in his cause. It was powerful enough that even decades later, Voldemort himself sought out Grindelwald's wisdom. That moment in Nurmengard, when Voldemort confronted the old dark wizard, was telling. Even in his final days, Grindelwald refused to bow. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't fear death. He looked Voldemort in the eye and laughed. He mocked him, because he knew that Voldemort was nothing compared to what he once was. He had built an empire. Voldemort had built a temporary reign of terror. And in the end, the world remembered Grindelwald as a ruler, while Voldemort was just another tyrant who fell. Even their defeats were different. Voldemort died alone. A man who had spent his life fearing death met his end in the most ironic way possible. No grand exit, no final act of defiance. He was stripped of his power, his soul in pieces, and when he died as nothing more than a mortal man. Grindelwald died with dignity. He faced his end knowing he had shaped history. He never begged, never broke. He outlived his empire, his dream, but even in his final moments, he remained unshaken. He was defeated, but he was never truly conquered. So who was the greater dark wizard? The answer is clear. Voldemort was a villain, but Grindelwald was a ruler. Voldemort was feared, but Grindelwald was followed. Voldemort's story ended with his name being erased. Grindelwald's name became legend. And if we are talking about power, not just magical ability, but true influence, intelligence, and leadership, then there's no contest. Grindelwald was the strongest dark wizard the world had ever seen.